Once there was a man named Job. He lived in a faraway land called Uz. Job was a very good man, and he loved God with all his heart. He tried his best every day to do what was right and to stay away from anything that was wrong. God looked down from heaven and was very happy with Job. He saw that Job was an honest and kind man. Job was blessed with a big, loving family. He had 7 sons and 3 beautiful daughters. They would often have wonderful feasts together, laughing and sharing stories under the warm sun. Job's heart was full of joy whenever he saw his children happy and healthy, and he thanked God for them every single day. Job was also a very rich man. His wealth was not just in gold or silver, but in the vast herds of animals he owned. He had thousands of sheep that dotted the hillsides like fluffy white clouds. He owned great herds of camels, so many that they looked like a long, slow-moving river when they traveled across the desert sand. He also had hundreds of oxen and donkeys that helped his many servants plow his fields and carry his goods. Everyone in the land knew about Job's great wealth and his even greater kindness. He was known as the most respected man in all the East, not just for his riches, but for his good and generous heart. Job's life was peaceful and full of blessings. His days were filled with purpose, overseeing his vast estate and making sure his family and servants were well cared for. He would wake up early in the morning, even before the sun peeked over the horizon, to pray to God. He would pray for his children, asking God to protect them and forgive them if they had done anything wrong. His faith was a steady and constant part of his life, like a strong tree with deep roots. Job believed that all the good things he had came from God, and he was always grateful. He lived a life of contentment, surrounded by his family, his wealth, and his strong faith. One day, something happened in heaven. The angels came to present themselves before God, and among them was a figure called Satan, the accuser. God spoke to Satan and asked him, "Have you seen my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is a good man who loves me and stays away from evil." Satan replied that Job only loved God because God had protected him and blessed him with so much wealth. He suggested that if God took away all of Job's possessions, Job would surely turn his back on God and curse him. God, knowing Job's heart, allowed Satan to test Job's faith, but he commanded that Satan was not to harm Job himself. The test of Job's faith began suddenly and without any warning at all. One ordinary day, while Job's sons and daughters were enjoying a meal at their oldest brother's house, a messenger came running to Job. The man was out of breath and his face was pale with fear. He bowed low and delivered terrible news. He told Job that raiders had attacked while the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby. The enemies had stolen all the animals and had killed the servants who were with them. The messenger said that he was the only one who had managed to escape to tell Job what had happened. Job's heart sank as he heard this, but before he could even process the loss, another messenger arrived. This second messenger looked up at the sky with wide, terrified eyes. He told a story that was even more shocking than the first. He explained that a great fire had fallen from the heavens. This fire had burned up all of Job's thousands of sheep and had also killed the shepherds who were watching over them. The man trembled as he spoke, saying he alone had escaped the blaze to bring the dreadful news. Job's mind could barely grasp the scale of this disaster. In a single moment, a huge part of his wealth was gone, completely wiped out by a strange and powerful fire. He felt a deep sense of shock and confusion, as if the world he knew was crumbling around him. The terrible reports did not stop there. A third messenger came rushing in, his clothes torn and his face covered in dust. He gasped for air and told Job that powerful raiders from another land had formed 3 groups and had swept down upon his herds of camels. They had stolen every single one and had killed the servants who were with them. Once again, the messenger declared that he was the only one who had survived to tell the tale. Job listened to this news in stunned silence. His great herds of camels, the very symbol of his wealth and status, were all gone. In just a few short moments, his fortune had vanished as if it were a dream. Finally, a fourth messenger appeared, and his news was the most devastating of all. This man was weeping, and he could barely speak through his tears. He told Job that while his 10 beloved children were feasting together, a mighty wind had come roaring out of the desert. The wind was so strong that it struck the 4 corners of the house, causing it to collapse upon them. The messenger choked back a sob and said, "All of your sons and daughters are gone." and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." When Job heard this, the weight of all the sorrow crashed down upon him. He had lost everything: his wealth, his animals, and now all of his precious children. In the face of such unimaginable loss, Job's heart was completely broken. The pain he felt was deeper than any ocean. He stood up, and in a gesture of profound grief, he tore his robe. Then he shaved his head, which was a sign of deep mourning in his culture. He fell to the ground not in anger but in humility. He put his face to the earth and began to worship God. Instead of cursing God or shouting in rage, Job spoke words of incredible faith. He said, "I came into this world with nothing, and I will leave with nothing. The Lord gave me everything I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praised be the name of the Lord." In all of this tragedy, Job did not sin by blaming God for what had happened. Once again, the angels came to present themselves before God in heaven, and Satan was there with them. God said to Satan, "Have you seen my servant Job? He is still faithful, even though you encouraged me to ruin him for no reason." Satan answered back with another challenge. He argued that Job was only faithful because his own body had not been harmed. "A man will give up everything he has to save his own life," Satan said. "But if you stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, he will surely curse you to your face." So God allowed Satan to test Job further, giving him permission to harm Job's body, but commanding him to spare Job's life. Satan left God's presence and immediately struck Job with a terrible sickness. Painful sores broke out all over Job's body, from the very top of his head to the soles of his feet. The pain was constant and agonizing. Job was so miserable that he sat down in a pile of ashes, a place for those who were mourning and in deep distress. He took a broken piece of pottery and used it to scrape his itching, painful sores, trying to find even a moment of relief from his suffering. He was no longer the great and respected man he once was. Now he was a broken figure, covered in sores, sitting in ashes, and surrounded by his own immense sorrow and pain. Job's transformation was startling and complete. He had gone from being the wealthiest and most honored man in the land to the most pitiful. His healthy body was now ravaged by a horrible disease. His comfortable home was replaced by a pile of ashes. The sounds of his children's laughter were replaced by a crushing silence. Yet even in this state of utter misery, Job's spirit wrestled. The physical pain was immense, but the pain in his heart was even greater. He was trying to make sense of a world that had turned completely upside down, where everything he loved and valued had been violently stripped away from him in an instant. As Job sat in his misery, even his own wife began to lose hope. Seeing his terrible suffering and remembering all they had lost, she came to him and spoke words of despair. "Are you still holding on to your faith?" she asked him, her voice filled with bitterness and sorrow. "Why don't you just curse God and die?" Her words were like sharp stones, adding to the mountain of pain that was already crushing Job. But even then, Job refused to turn against God. He looked at his wife and replied with a sad but firm voice, "You are talking like a foolish woman. We accept the good things from God, so we must also accept the hard times." In all of this, Job did not sin with his words. Soon, 3 of Job's friends heard about all the terrible things that had happened to him. Their names were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They decided to travel together to visit Job, to comfort him and show him sympathy. When they arrived and saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize their friend. He was so changed by his sickness and his grief that they were completely shocked. They began to weep loudly, and they tore their own robes and sprinkled dust on their heads as a sign of their shared sorrow. They could see that Job's suffering was immense, and they were overwhelmed with pity for their friend who had fallen so far. For 7 days and 7 nights, Job's 3 friends sat on the ground with him in complete silence. They did not say a single word because they saw how great his suffering was. They simply sat with him, sharing in his silent grief. This quiet companionship was perhaps the most comforting thing they could have offered. But after those 7 silent days, the quiet was broken. Job finally opened his mouth and began to speak, and the words that poured out were not of faith, but of deep despair. He cursed the day he was born and wished he had never existed. He cried out, asking why he had to continue living when his life was so full of pain and darkness. This outburst from Job started a long and difficult conversation. His friends who had come to comfort him now felt they needed to explain his suffering. Eliphaz spoke first, suggesting that Job must have done something wrong to deserve such punishment, because good people do not suffer like this. Bildad and Zophar followed with similar arguments, each one trying to convince Job that his pain was a direct result of some hidden sin. They believed that God was just, and therefore Job's immense suffering must be a just punishment. Their words were not comforting at all. Instead, they felt like accusations, adding a heavy burden of guilt to Job's already unbearable pain. Job listened to his friends, but their explanations did not make sense to him. He knew in his heart that he had tried his best to live a good life. He had not committed some terrible secret sin that would deserve such a horrific punishment. So, he began to argue with his friends, defending his innocence. He told them, "Your words are no help at all. You are miserable comforters." He felt completely alone, misunderstood by the very people who were supposed to be there for him. He insisted that he was not a wicked man and that their simple answers about sin and punishment did not fit his situation. This made him feel even more isolated in his suffering. As the debates continued, Job's focus shifted from his friends to God. He felt that his friends could not understand, so he began to speak directly to the heavens. He cried out to God with all the pain and confusion in his soul. He asked powerful, desperate questions. "Why is this happening to me?" he would cry. "What have I done wrong? Why have you made me your target?" At times he was angry, feeling that God was treating him like an enemy for no reason. At other times he was filled with sadness, pleading with God to just leave him alone and let him have a moment of peace before he died. Job's faith was being stretched to its absolute limit. He still believed in God, but he could no longer understand God's ways. He felt that God was powerful and wise, but also distant and silent. He longed for a chance to stand before God and plead his case like a man in a courtroom. He wanted to lay out his life and ask God to show him where he had gone wrong. He said, "If only I knew where to find him, if only I could go to his dwelling. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments." He was desperate for an answer, for any sign that God was still listening and still cared about his suffering. Through all the long speeches and painful arguments, Job's feelings swung back and forth like a pendulum. One moment he would express a glimmer of hope, trusting that God would eventually prove him innocent. The next moment he would sink back into the depths of hopelessness, convinced that he was going to die without ever getting an answer. He wrestled with the biggest questions of life. Why do good people suffer? Is God really fair? Where is God when it hurts the most? Job did not have the answers, and the silence from heaven felt heavy and unbearable. His honest cries and questions showed a faith that was struggling, but a faith that refused to let go of God completely. After Job and his friends had finished all their long and painful debates, a powerful voice finally spoke, but it was not the voice of another friend or another argument. It was the voice of God himself, speaking to Job from out of a whirlwind. God did not answer Job's specific questions about why he was suffering. He did not explain the challenge from Satan or list any hidden sins. Instead, God began to ask Job questions of his own. He challenged Job's understanding with a magnificent display of his power and wisdom. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" God asked. "Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know." God continued to speak, painting a majestic picture of his creation. He spoke of the vast sea and how he set its boundaries, telling the proud waves, "This far you may come and no farther." He asked Job if he had ever commanded the morning to begin or shown the dawn its place. He described the secret storehouses of snow and hail which he had reserved for times of trouble. God's words were like a rushing river, sweeping away Job's small perspective and replacing it with a breathtaking view of God's infinite power. He was reminding Job that the universe was far bigger and more complex than any human could ever hope to fully understand. The Lord then turned Job's attention to the wonders of the animal kingdom. He asked Job if he was the one who provided food for the lions or fed the young ravens when they cry out to God. He spoke of the wild mountain goats and the deer, who give birth in places no human sees. He described the wild donkey, who loves its freedom in the desert, and the powerful wild ox, which no man can tame. God spoke of the magnificent wings of the ostrich and the soaring flight of the hawk and the eagle. Through these examples, God was showing Job that his wisdom and care extend to every corner of creation in ways that are mysterious and beautiful. God's speech was not meant to crush Job, but to humble him and expand his vision. He wasn't scolding Job for asking questions. He was showing him that the answers were part of a much grander design. God's point was clear. If Job could not understand the workings of the natural world that he could see, how could he possibly understand the hidden ways of God's justice and purpose? The speech from the whirlwind was a powerful reminder that God is in control of everything, even the things that seem chaotic and unjust. It was an invitation for Job to trust in the wisdom of the Creator, even when he could not see the whole picture. After hearing God speak from the whirlwind, Job was completely changed. All his arguments and demands for answers melted away. He was filled with a deep sense of awe and humility. He finally understood that he had been speaking about things that were too wonderful for him to know. He covered his mouth with his hand and replied to God, "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more." He realized that his human understanding was tiny compared to God's infinite wisdom. He had demanded to see God and question him, but now that he was in God's presence, all he could do was listen in reverent silence. God spoke a second time, continuing to reveal his power through the description of two mighty creatures, the behemoth and the leviathan. These powerful, untamable beasts served as one final symbol of God's supreme authority over all of creation. After this final, powerful speech, Job gave his last reply. Humbly and with a completely new understanding, he said to the Lord, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." Job's faith was no longer based on what he had been told. It was now based on a personal and powerful encounter with God himself. After Job humbled himself, God turned to Job's three friends. He was not pleased with them, because they had not spoken the truth about him as Job had. They had tried to fit God into a simple box, claiming that all suffering was a direct punishment for sin. Job, in his honest wrestling and questioning, had been more truthful about the mystery of God. God commanded the friends to offer a sacrifice, and he told them that his servant Job would pray for them, and God would accept Job's prayer. This showed that Job was restored to his rightful place, not because he had all the answers, but because he had an honest and humble heart before God. In the end, God restored everything that Job had lost, and he gave him twice as much as he had before. His brothers, sisters, and all his old friends came to celebrate with him. God blessed the last part of Job's life even more than the first. He gave him 7 more sons and 3 more beautiful daughters. Job lived for another 140 years, long enough to see his children's children to the 4th generation. Job's story teaches a powerful lesson. Faith is not about understanding everything. It is about trusting God's wisdom and goodness, even in the darkest and most painful times, knowing that his love and his purposes are greater than our suffering.